Can you imagine living in a country where you can be imprisoned for reading a book? Even the book by Nobel Prize winners with global recognition and respect. Well, I was born in that kind of country. I can't remember the time of USSR because it collapsed when I was only 1 year old. But my parents and my grandparents remember this time. It was the time when they used to read these books written by hands or poorly copied. In this video, I'll tell you in details about 10 most famous and important of them. But there was a lot of books that were completely lost in such a difficult time. Today you can easily find these books almost in every bookstore in Russia and around the world in variety of translations. Also, I'll tell you about probably the last Russian great epic novel, which kept the traditions of Tolstoy and Sholokhov, and tells about the exact time of Soviet dissidents, their and their families' destinies. So make sure to stick to the end of the video and add one great book to your to-read list. So here we go, 10 books banned in USSR. Number 1. Dr. Zhivago by Boris Pasternak. Pasternak didn't believe in the lifetime publication of Dr. Zhivago, but it brought him the Nobel Prize, world fame and persecution in his native country. Soviet publishing houses immediately banned his work. It was recognized as anti-Soviet, insulting the principles of social realism and the people who made the revolution. The novel was banned, and in 1956 Pasternak handed over the manuscript to Italy, where it was first published. This caused even greater negativity on the part of compatriots. In 1958 the writer received the Nobel Prize, but refused it under pressure. The authorities still considered the novel counter-revolutionary and slanderous. Later Pasternak was expelled from the Writers' Union, and the prize was transferred to his son only in 1989, when the author was no longer alive. Number 2. The GULAG Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. The book about repressions in the USSR was written secretly. The manuscripts were in different cities, and the writer kept only one chapter he was working on currently. The first volume was published in Paris in 1973. It had the effect of the exploding bomb, and Solzhenitsyn's assistant, who revealed the location of one of the manuscripts, committed suicide. After the incident, the writer gave the order to start an active press in the West, and in the USSR a large-scale campaign was launched against him. He was called the author slandering the state and social system, accused of choking with hatred for the country where he was born and raised, and the novel was called a musty book. 6 months later, Solzhenitsyn was arrested on charge of treason, deprived of his citizenship, and expelled from the country. In the USSR, Archipelago was published only at the end of 1989 by the publishing house Soviet Writer. Book number 3. Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Published in 1955 in Paris, the English-language novel Lolita was considered by Nabokov to be the best book of his career. It is worth nothing that the book was banned not only in the USSR. For example, the first attempts to publish the manuscript in the United States were unsuccessful. The publishers called it pornography. Nevertheless, the publication of Lolita brought Nabokov world fame. The writer himself took up the translation of the book into Russian, but didn't believe in the publication. In the USSR, the novel was banned as a spiritual poison and the product of an immigrant who betrayed his own country. Although copies of Lolita were distributed on the samizdat market for 10 rubles. Soviet citizens were able to officially read the book for the first time only in 1989. Book number 4. Animal Farm by George Orwell. It's not difficult to understand why this work was banned in the USSR. The satirical Animal Farm is a parody of the 1917 revolution and the subsequent years. Orwell's book harshly denounced all the vices and shortcomings of the dictatorship. It's believed that there is a file on the writer in the KGB archive. Among other things, it calls him the author of the vile book about the Soviet Union. So the name of Orwell was banned in the USSR for many years. And his books were distributed under fear of arrest. And the first publication of Animal Farm took place only in 1988 in the Riga magazine Rodnik. Book number 5. Journey into the Whirlwind by Eugenia Ginzburg. It's an autobiographical novel about the years spent in the Stalinist camps. Ginzburg defined as the chronicles from the time of the cult of personality. After the report of Nikita Khrushchev in 1956, it became permissible to talk about repressions. At that time, many began to create memoirs, including Ginzburg, but a short period of thaw was followed by stagnation and a new silence. The first edition of the book took place in Milan in 1967. and after in other publishing houses in Europe and America. At the same time, in the USSR, the book was banned for a long time and existed only in samizdat until 1988. I have almost a personal story about this book. A friend of mine came to a local bookstore to buy Allen Ginsberg's poem Howl, but he was told by staff of the shop that the book is banned and he couldn't buy it anywhere. And it's ridiculous because they mixed up two different writers who both are not banned in Russian for now, at least. Book number 6, We by Evgeny Zamyatin. The novel, an exploration of the essence of totalitarianism, influenced many writers including Orwell, Huxley and Vonnegut. In the USSR, the book was immediately banned, but in 1921 the manuscript was taken to Berlin by post. After the English-language publication in 1924, a wave of harassment from the authorities and the writers' community hit Zamyatin. The book was seen as a mockery of the communist society of the future. It obviously was. Contemporaries also actively joined the criticism. Chukovsky admitted that he hated the novel, and Gorky called the work a desperately bad thing. Having lost the opportunity to publish, Zamyatin was forced to write to Stalin with a request to be allowed to leave the country. Book number 7, Cursed Days by Ivan Bunin. Cursed Days is another book on the list that didn't pass Soviet censorship for obvious reasons. The collection of the writer's memoirs about the horrors and injustice of the revolution is saturated with hatred for the new regime. In addition, Bunin was not shy in the expressions regarding the new government. As a result, the work was strictly banned in the USSR, and the writer who left to France first published Cursed Days in the Parisian newspaper called Возрождение, and the novel was published as a completely separate edition in 1936 in Berlin. After Stalin's death, some of Bunin's work were printed in small print runs in the USSR, but Cursed Days, critical of the Bolsheviks, were banned until 1988. Book number 8, The Heart of a Dog by Mikhail Bulgakov. Bulgakov's relations with the Soviet authorities cannot be called simple. The Heart of a Dog is a political satire on the revolution and the proletariat. That's why the book was banned as anti-Soviet until Perestroika. Having finished the work in 1925, Bulgakov tried in vain to publish it. The manuscript did not pass censors, who indicated that the thing is inaccessible. However, Bulgakov continued to read his book in literary meetings until an informant of the GPU turned up at them. In May 1926, during a search in Bulgakov's apartment, the manuscript was confiscated and returned to him only a few years later. Book number 9, Russia in the Shadows by Herbert Wells. The work of the famous writer consists of the series of articles he wrote for the Sunday Express newspaper during his trip to the Soviet Union in 1920. After arriving at the invitation of Lev Kamenev, he admitted that he expected authorities to conceal the true state of affairs, but the state of the country turned out to be so terrible that it was impossible. Describing terrible pictures of life in Soviet cities, Wells doomed the work to censorship. Until 1958, the book was published in the USSR only once, with numerous edits and an introduction explaining the ignorance of the writer. Book number 10, For Whom the Bell Tolls by Ernest Hemingway. You may ask, how could an American writer and Nobel Prize winner not please censorship? However, his For Whom the Bell Tolls did not pass the approval of the Soviet editors. Initially planned for publication in the International Literature magazine, the novel was on the stop list. It's all about the negative image of the communist leader Andrei Marty. According to the characteristics of the people around Marty, he is completely crazy. This argument was enough for the novel to be banned in the USSR. The book reached the mass Soviet reader in 1968, but with significant censorship corrections. Previously I promised you to tell about probably the last Russian great epic novel, which is dedicated to Soviet dissidents, who ignored the rules of censorship and grew their freedom inside. It's the novel by Lyudmila Ulitskaya called The Big Green Tent. It's a story of three school friends who meet in Moscow in the 1950s and go on to embody the heroism, folly, compromise and hope of the Soviet dissident experience. Three boys, an orphan poet, a gifted pianist and a photographer with the talent for collecting secrets, struggle to reach adulthood in society where their heroes have been censored and exiled. Each of the central characters seeks to transcend an oppressive regime through art, a love of Russian literature and activism. and each of them ends up face to face with the secret police. Living in a world where you don't have access to every piece of human culture and even can be punished for attempts to read books is awful, and I hope it won't come again. Reading books and treating them with respect is the best way to save every piece of your local and global culture. I hope you liked this video, so make sure to hit the like and subscribe buttons, it really helps this channel to grow. See you soon, bye bye!